territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people in so-called Ottawa. And being in Ottawa, where the colonial seat of government is, I'm constantly reminded of the history of coloni and ongoing colonization and its impact on Indigenous people here in Canada. And I know that there is a lot of talk that we have been that we've been having Tuesday as well as today about Canada and a lot of the external threat to the country and its sovereignty. And I know that but before we acknowledge that reality, we have to understand that like these borders are colonial. Toto Island are first and foremost indigenous land, and we are all guests on this on these territories. I would invite you to introduce yourself as well as the indigenous land that you're calling in from today, in addition to how you found out about this training. And then just to know that as we move forward in confronting the impact of the corporate greed that have manifested itself in the last several centuries through expropriation of indigenous lands, marginalization of their communities, as well as pushing through pipelines or fracking or other extractive projects. We also know that the threat of many conservative governments like Pierre Poilievre and many provincial governments is also including opening up more of pushing more through of these projects, violating indigenous rights, and a fight to stand up for the Canada we want must start with and continue to conclude standing up alongside our indigenous allies. So with that, I'm gonna get us started with the slide deck that I think Nick is going to share. We're gathering here today for a training on how to host a kitchen table conversation. This is the second time we've done it. The first time we done it with a much smaller group, so bear with us. But today we are going essentially. Many of you might have seen the content being a little bit familiar, so I will fly through them a little bit. Um, but today we will be talking about the kitchen table conversation. You see the acronym KTC a lot. That's what we mean. We would talk about who to invite, what is it, when do we host it, where do we host it, why do we host it. We walk you through preparing for a kitchen table conversation, including, but not limited to, like the leading up to it, the process of what the structure of a conversation looks like. It's very limited structure, but not, but would we provide a little bit of framework, but obviously use that as a starting point. We have a bit of a fishbowl exercise so that folks can see one of us having conversation with two participants to see how it looks and have a little bit of reflection and then time for Q&A. Um, yeah, that's the plan. And then a lot of the plan for today is going to be the content for today will also be pulled from the kitchen table conversation facilitation guide that my colleague will put the link in the chat. We've shared that with you. Nick is putting it on the screen. Essentially, like 95% of the things coming out of my mouth is already written down in that thing. So if listening to someone talk about it is your thing, then you're here. If you would rather talk, hear just read about it, you can read it there. But we also will also we'll discuss a couple extras like how do we continue staying in touch afterwards? What kind of support do you have? That sort of thing. All right. Yeah, it's not KFC. I promise. There is no fried chicken at this training. So that's the facilitation guide. That's what it looks like. It's there. Next slide, please. Okay, you've seen the slide already if you joined us on Tuesday, but essentially the plan, but what we are trying to do going into this federal election, but also beyond, is that understanding that a lot of the crises that we're facing, whether it's like climate disasters or housing affordability, fundamentally have its roots in the and disproportionate control that corporate greed have in decision-making power at many levels of government. At federal level, we know that like oil and gas companies have tried to stall climate action. We know that at the provincial level, a lot of developers are bankrolling the privatization of healthcare and push and corporate landlords are pushing causing the housing crisis, etc. So we know that like in the long run, in order to build the Canada we want, which is the thing at the end, the very last goal there, we have to understand, expose, and resist the corporate agenda, and that is the reality we have to do whether there's an election or not, whoever gets into power, we know that the crisis we're in today is not just exclusively caused by conservative. Many of the sitting governments in the last several decades have had a hand in creating this crisis. But we also are clear-eyed about the fact that the rise of the Poilievre and the conservatives are going to make it so much worse to fight. And so we understand that intervening in this upcoming federal election is also a key focus. And in order to get there, we know that like elections are whether we want to win the candidate we want or intervene in the election and have an actual impact, we know that right now the left doesn't have enough power. They have the money, but we have the many, but the many isn't organized. And so what we are doing right now with this campaign with the Council of Canadians is trying to do the first two boxes, which is building our base and rallying our allies. We know that needs to happen whether we intervene in the election or not. And the starting point is from getting more organized where we live. And that begins with a kitchen table conversation. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so why kitchen table conversation? Okay, let's say what first. What is a kitchen table conversation? Don't get hung up on the kitchen. Don't get hung up on the table. The conversation is where it matters. It's an informal gathering in someone's home or other comfortable venue. The kitchen table, the kitchen is that it's informal, but it also includes food or refreshment. So we want to make sure that people feel are able to come in with their full self. I know a lot of us sometimes come into like very stuffy meetings in like neon light rooms where you kind of just come in, get the business done, and get out. But we want to create a space that's slightly different from that. We want to create a space where um, your personal experience, your lived reality is honored and welcome. We want to create a space where building relationship is what matters. Sitting around a table, talking to each other, understanding how each of these crises impacting each and every one of us, and then build the path forward. The next slide is something you've seen already. We've done this and it's very successful. In small groups small groups of 6 to 8 people, which is a goal, the size that we're aiming for is like no more than 7 in a kitchen table conversation. So this is a photo from the Halifax Town Hall that many of you came to and then have come to this training from, where we have small group discussion that takes place in that context. If you go to the next slide, we will talk about why kitchen table conversation. Well, I think we talked a little bit about the fact that like the left isn't organized to face the actual crisis, the many intensifying crises that are affecting each and every one of us. And we also know that corporate greed is the root cause. But not everybody is on the same page. And then that reality of corporate greed is causing the many crises unfolding will look differently in different communities. So we need to be able to, first of all, what the organizer god Saeed Hassan often calls organize the choir, is that before we go and sing to the congregation and try to convert the masses, first we have to understand, we have to be on the same page, make sure we're singing from the same songbook, make sure we're practicing our harmonies. And that's what these conversations are. So kitchen table conversation makes space for us to be on the same page about the political understanding that whether is you are not able to get a family doctor, or whether you can't afford groceries, or you can't afford rent, or your children had asthma because of the intensifying wildfire smokes. All of those realities have this common root in the way the corporations have oversized control over our governments. And then there's also a space for us to build a strong foundation of relationship, work together. Once we have a shared understanding, then we can begin discussing what the next steps look like. And again, you know your local reality best, and you know among the groups that gather what are the unique contribution to the movement you have. So that's the space to do to have that conversation. The other thing that I think is beautiful and special about the kitchen table conversation when I had mine is that um, when I sit down and think about who to invite, can you go back to the last slide for a sec? When I think about who to invite to these conversations, I realize that um, the political, like the current context, kind of doesn't allow for spaces to do this. You are in a space where you talk about parenting because I have a child, or you're in a space where you talk about work, or you go in a space and talk about sports, and you're in a space where you hang out with your friends. And there isn't like political discussion is kind of a taboo topic. There isn't space to talk about it, and that's by design. It's by design so that you don't actually discuss and actually think about why we are struggling, and instead, and then actually have a space to understand the things that are happening to us. And as a result, we get increasingly feeling isolated. One of the indigenous activists, Janelle Lapointe, recently referred to this moment as a crisis of belonging. We don't feel like we're connected to others because we don't have space to actually be our full self with others. And so I think one of the things that excites me about um, these conversations is that it makes space to actively resist against the many different boxes that society try to sort us into and tear down those barriers and allow us to be in a room together, which is really nice after years of being isolation because of COVID, but also to talk about how hard things are, which is lovely. There was a lot of tears in my kitchen table conversation. We're going to the next slide. So that's the what and the why. There's a lot more information about how to prepare for a kitchen table conversation in the facilitation guide. But I would but these are the major steps. You can read more in there. I don't want to bore you with it. But first of all, let us know that you're doing one. There's a link in there to tell us that, like, this is mine, this is on this date, this is where it is. Get a planning team together. What I find is that if you're also doing the role of hosting and facilitating and making sure everybody's heard, everybody has a chance to speak, um, it's also a lot of work to manage food. So having another person just to be like, can you make sure to get tongs and utensils and plates is also nice. And then you pick a date and time and location. You send out an invitation, follow up with those invitation with in person, make a plan for refreshment, the dollar signs in there indicates that every kitchen table conversation that you are hosting, we are able to provide a small amount of fund to help you cover the cost. And the amount is $75, and we will not be able to reimburse for any alcohol purchase. So plan accordingly. And then prepare your materials. So like I would recommend printing this out, but if you find that having a script in front of you is distracting, then don't do that. Okay, I'm flying through things. So let me know if I am flying through things. And then I'm going to do that. Okay, next page. Next thing is the who. I think this is the hardest part. I don't know about you folks, but the hardest part for me is to figure out who to invite. And the main goal of these conversations, as we discussed, is that we want to organize the choir. We're not asking to change anyone's mind. We're asking at this stage is essentially a step in the process of leadership identification. You identify people in your community who are concerned about the crises, who are looking for a place to take political action, but haven't been engaged. They haven't had that opportunity yet. So if you're in a chapter of the Council of Canadians, I would invite you to think outside of the chapter. If you're part of a political organization, think slightly broader. For example, if someone who come to your chapter meeting for like twice, but haven't volunteered to do anything, reach out to them on a one-on-one and say, want to come to my house and do a and like participate in a kitchen table conversation. Nick, who would you invite to your kitchen table conversation?
Um, yeah, I've been thinking about this, and there's a few places I would go. I mean, just off the top of my head, I saw a guy at the cafe that I go to fairly regularly who has spoken to me a few times because I was reading a book about ecological planning, and he seemed really interested in that topic. He was really interested in degrowth, and I told him a bit about the council, and he said, yeah, I want to know more. And so I've been emailing with him. So that's kind of person where it's like, this is an obvious like in for him where this is the
Mm,
next step he could take. I can invite him to something formal. We'd see if he would come or not. But
exactly.
that's the kind of person that I'm thinking about. I also play soccer in a soccer league with a lot of people who are on the left broadly and thinking about these things. So that's something I've been thinking about is people too. But also in Montreal, the Anglo left, the Anglos are often in our corner on our own politically, and I think there's a lot of space for doing that. So yeah, I've been thinking mostly about people in my neighborhood that I know because I've lived more or less in the same neighborhood for about 20 years in Montreal. So you get to know a lot of people around town just by that. So that's one idea that I've had for people I would invite to my kitchen table conversation.
Thank you. Eagle, some thoughts about who you would invite to your kitchen table if you'd like to share?
Um, geez. I actually don't really know who I'd invite to my kitchen table. Most of my friends are very politically active, and I'd want to expand my circle. I do on the side help out my neighbor. He owns a wharf, and I help him with some of his boats. Um, would he be a good person to invite to something like this?
Well, depends on whether you have some inkling about whether he is looking to get more politically involved. So, like someone that I thought about, if you go to the next slide, Nick, is this is this is I had a kitchen table conversation and the people like each other so much that they get together a second time. So this is technically not my kitchen table conversation, but it is a kitchen at a table and we're having a conversation. And the guy in the blue shirt is a friend that I made through parenting. Like his kid and my kid go to gymnastics together, and then we follow each other on Instagram, and he keeps sharing content about how angry the genocide in Gaza made him. And so I invited him and his partner to our kitchen table conversation. On the other side is my friend Ashley, who I have expressed interest in becoming a member of a local group called Climate Justice Ottawa that I was somewhat involved with. And so I was, and then that's his partner Peter, who plays in a band. So I was like, "You want to come and hang out?" And then we had a wonderful conversation. And now she's fully in Climate Justice Ottawa. It's great. So these are some of the people, and I see that folks are writing in the chat some thoughts about who you would invite. So what I would encourage you to do is to take 2 minutes with some pen and paper, if you have them in front of you, or a phone, and just do a quick brainstorm. You go back a slide. So you would think about make a list of 5 to 7 people that you would invite to your kitchen table conversation with a little bit of like a note about why you think they'd be a good fit. So just take 2 minutes to do that. All right. Hi, folks. I hope you have some good notes in front of you. Next, what we're going to do is spending 10 minutes in a breakout room. I'm sure you have a lot of interesting thoughts about who you would invite, and I would encourage you to share who these people are to your folks, to people in your breakout room. And then to just make sure that you share who they are, and then make sure that everybody in the room, that we four of you, to have a chance to share. And then I hope that with that exercise, it will jot your memories about people that you haven't thought about, but maybe would be good to invite. All right, 10 minutes in a breakout room. It should prompt you right now. Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. Others are just wrapping up their conversation, so just bear with us for a bit. Hope you folks had a nice chat with people from random location. Yeah, I see some nods. That's nice. It had been my grand plan to sort you all into rooms where you are kind of geographically close to each other. It did not pan out. We were too short staffed. Did not happen. Um, but you still had a good time. I mean, I think one of the benefits of having a national webinar trainings is this hang out with people you don't typically hang out with. I think we're back. 61 people. Woohoo. Did folks have a good time in the breakout room?
Mhm. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Not wonderful. I'm glad to hear. So, I would love for folks to share in the chat some new idea that you have from having a conversation with others. Put in the chat if you were like, I didn't think about that, but I now do have somebody. Pop it in the chat. I would love to hear. And then so far, I've seen people who talk about having colleagues and former colleagues, people who are in a book club, people, acquaintances in the neighborhood. I dropped into the group where people who I always meet at rallies. Great idea. Those are people who are engaged, but you know what? Going to rallies alone, not enough. Email list from a group. That's a great idea. A book club. Wonderful. Community garden members. Neighbors, absolutely. I agree. I agree. My new trick is that we recently have a provincial election in Ontario, and then I just scout out all my neighbors who have non-conservative lawn signs, and I mean like, so what do you think? So that's an idea. My colleague Angela, who's unfortunately is sick today, hosted a kitchen table conversation in her community in the eastern shore of Nova Scotia. She's in a pretty active surfing community and essentially just pulled together a kitchen table conversation with like five other surfers. So sports group, always a great idea. There are questions about whether you can we can put people in touch with one another. Absolutely. It will be a bit slow because there's a lot of people, but those are some ideas that we have. I see more thoughts from people. Yeah, yes. Ed says think of people who want to be a group to take action, but not everyone will come. Friends are not that good. It's okay. We can make new friends. Local CFC chapter members. Something that I know that a couple of folks have asked is just you don't know. Sometimes you see people who are very active on social media. This is a good way to engage them. Or sometimes you just know the people you hang out with a lot, but but don't quite know where they are in terms of the political action level. Then some of the the next part of my presentation is going to be about just questions. And you can pull some of these questions and like pepper them into conversations with them to see where people are at, just to gauge the level of interest and see like, oh, that person is just as angry as I am that Big Pharma has the kind of impact that they do. Then reel them in. So there's a lot of way to like suss out whether these people are people who you have to do a lot of work to move on our side or is already primed to take action. They just don't know what the next thing to do is. Okay.
I'll just jump in and say that there's an immense number of people who are feeling the same way as we are. There's been lots of polling done, but about how people are feeling about the prospect of a possible Pierre Poilievre majority government. And I think it was like almost 1/3 of Canadians were saying that they were dreading it. They were fearful of what that was. So that's even if you're in a riding that probably goes conservative consistently, there's going to be people around you that you can find. And I don't know if George Hewison is here. Here for a training we did for chapters, and I thought I saw him on the call. But one of the things he said when we presented this idea to the chapters, and we were discussing, what you could use a kind of how a kitchen table conversation could be useful where people are. One of the things he said, what I thought was very useful, which was that he was saying in his area, Kawartha Lakes, there was a bunch of different groups that all work on different issues, ecological groups, groups fighting against sprawl, trying to protect the green belt in Ontario and things like that. And that, George being an active person in that community was saying, this is a perfect opportunity for us to kind of get together and have a discussion about the whole picture, right? Instead of just talking about, the elephant's trunk or the elephant's tail or the elephant's leg, you're getting to talk about the whole thing, right? And I think that was something that was, it really felt like, okay, George gets it. George sees the value. And so if you're, a chapter member, or if you're in that kind of position, that's also something that the kitchen table conversation can be a pretext for, which is getting these people together across different organizations and sitting together to have a discussion about the political moment.
Absolutely. And that will also get us like moving from the building the base step into, if you remember my flow chart, building the base to rallying our allies. Because the first step is to get ourselves organized, but the next step is that we know that this problem affects multiple constituencies, and it's reaching out to those groups is going to be beneficial. If we can get the slide deck back, I'm going to talk about what happened in a kitchen table conversation. And I apologize in advance. I'm going to fly through things because there's a lot to cover. But again, we're hoping that this is a starting point. We have tested this many different times, either in town halls. Each of the staff have hosted a number of kitchen table conversations. These are questions that we're still workshopping through. So as you go through them, you will like, after your kitchen table conversation, you're like, that question, nobody, no bite. But the other one, if I reframe it like this, it bites. So like we constantly are looking for more feedback from you. Nick, can you get the slide back, please? If you can. Waiting. There we go. So these are the 7 touch points. It sounds like a lot. It's not, I promise. These are these are like I think the helpful touch points for me to make sure that like, oh, and these are the conversation that we imagine to take place within 2 hours for 7 people. So as the host, your work is essentially to make sure everyone feels welcome, everyone has space to speak, and then we move through these topics. Starting with the first step with gathering and mingling. This is the time for you to say for a video call. Hello. We're starting with gathering and mingling, where you make sure this is the time for the bust out the food, and then it takes a while. Like I don't know, I hosted a shawarma party. It took like people like 45 minutes to get the shawarma in their mouth. Um, Budget accordingly. If you have children, it will be a good time to get them set up, having some side activities, just to make sure that the space is inclusive to everyone who participate. And then you go to the next slide. Sorry, I'm just okay. It's the introduction. So it's the time back one. Um, where we would just take a time to be like, welcome, introducing yourself, why you're here, inviting people to share a bit about what brought them to this conversation. And something that we have been encouraging people to do is that even if people say, I'm here because V invites me, I would encourage folks to say, why would you say yes to V? Because I think like highlighting the fact that the relational aspect of it is what brought people in the room is still really helpful. Sometimes people will share about how they don't have the space to have this conversation, or they want to come just for the food, or they come because so and so invite them. I think it's helpful to understand like what brought people into the room and a little bit about themselves. Um, yeah, moving on to the host opener. Host opener is essentially where you provide a little bit of context about I've gathered you all here because type conversation. And this is essentially the only part where you have to do a little bit of speaking. And so we have provided you, and like in this part, essentially the major point is that like we're in a moment of multiple compounding, intensifying crises. We realize that corporate greed is at the root cause. We know that the growing sentiment of conservative rising in the polls is because of a massive level of disillusionment among people. And then we understand that we got to fight back. You go to the next slide. To make the work slightly less burdensome for you, at the end of the facilitation guide, there is a script for you. So it's there. You can just read that if you want, or you can just not read that and just do it in your own word if you want. You can alter it based on who's in the room if you'd like. And then so on the left is the script. It's short, it's sweet, it's simple. And then on the right is the primer. This is the other gigantic document. There's a 6-page document that kind of like dig really deep into everything that we're talking about, providing some context, providing some statistics, providing some trends, everything. So if you are worried about the political context that you're setting being too much, we can always circulate the primer in advance before so that when you come in, it feels a bit more manageable. Okay, so script, host opener. That's the only big speaking part, and we don't suggest that you speak for more than 10 minutes. Next slide is, yeah, this is what I already told you. These are the major points. Yes, everything is in the guide, Josephine, so it exists. And then after that is essentially a conversation. Like it is going to be a round table. Conversation will be fast moving. Um, and from here on out, you have a couple like key questions to keep the conversation moving. So first of all, we'll just you just verbal vomit 10 minutes of political context. And then we move on to reflection and discussion where we ask the following questions. Next slide, please. Um, what do you think about what I just shared? Does that make sense? Does that resonate with you? Does it reflect your experience? Does it raise any question? And then a couple other questions that we pop in there is like, how do we explain the conservative surge in popularity? Their explanation for the current crises? What are our explanation for the current crises? So like, you don't have to go through all of these questions. These are just questions that we throw in there to encourage people to think about the reality. But at the end of the day, I put the quote from Naomi Klein from her latest book, Doppelganger, is that the conspiracy theorists get the facts wrong, but they get the feelings right. And I think a lot of it, um, we're trying to get at the bottom of the fact that the people don't feel heard, other than by conservative politicians, because they are getting the feelings right. And now it's our time to step in, have these conversations, and try to get the feelings right. Next page. Now we're going on to personal experience. Now that people will be like, okay, big picture, political discussion, blah, blah, blah. We drill down into how do these crises affect you personally? We invite people to bring in their personal experience. This is the space to say, to invite people to keep whatever being shared in the conversation to stay in the conversation so that it stay confidential. I'm so sorry if my son is really loud. Um, Perfect. And then if it's people don't feel like they want to share the personal experience right away, it's always helpful to model it. So what I often do as a host is I ask the question of like, how does this affect you personally? And I let the room think about it. And if the room was like, I'm not sure how to share, I would model it by sharing first. So in your preparation, I would encourage you to also think about how these crises affect you personally and then prepare to talk about it. Next slide, please. Yes, I just said that. What are the issues that, okay, go back one. Sorry. What are the issues that feel most pressing to you? How is it affecting you personally? How does it make you feel? And then the really big question is, who is causing these issues? Inviting people to dig one step further. So in my kitchen table conversation, a lot of people were like, all my problems are caused by the mayor. And then I asked them, why do you think the mayor doing what he's doing? And then as the further we dig, the more we realize the mayor and the evil councilor that we think are evil are doing the way they do, that are voting the way they do, making decisions the way they did because they are heavily funded by the special interests like developers that motivate them to act in a certain way. This is a lovely diorama produced by a local student in the Ottawa Valley. Our local chapter in KOV had this on display at this recent event where they describe how climate change affect them. So I think we all have those stories and the opportunity. This is the opportunity to actually talk about them. And you'll be surprised. A lot of people don't have the space to talk about how these crises affect them. Like how does climate change affect people's decision to have children? How does the healthcare crisis make them feel? How does the growing impact of affordability influence people's life circumstances? These are like highly personal reality that I think is very helpful to get grounded in, to understand that each of us actually have a stake in this fight, and to be able to make space to understand where each other's coming from and fighting for is how we build relationships. And then this is when it gets really sad. And then your job as a host to be like, make sure everybody have a chance to share, reflect, validate, make sure that they know that they're being heard. People bounce ideas off of each other. But then orienting to solution is when it gets less sad. Orienting to solution is when it gets fun. Because this is when we say, what are we going to do about this? Because if we end the meeting there, everybody will go home being sadder than they come into the meeting with, and that's not what we want. So orienting to solution is when we start asking the questions, how do we fight back? And another thing that the current system have been very successful at doing is to make us forget. Not only do we forget all the terrible things that have happened to us and then keep electing the terrible politicians over and over again, it also makes us forget all the wonderful thing we've won through social movement. So next slide, please. So this is the place where we ask ourselves, how have we fought corporate power before? How did we win? What are some local examples of movement histories? What do we have to do to popularize these explanations or solutions? How do we get to the Canada we want? And you'd be surprised. First, when I asked this question, the people in my group were like, "Oh, I don't know. I'm only 25 years old." But then we actually have won before. These are some examples of wins in the last couple of decades. There's some photo from the Mike Harris Days of Action, fighting far-right governments, winning rent control in Halifax. Speaker on Tuesday talked about that. Um, the fight alongside Elsipogtog First Nations to resist fracking in New Brunswick. We've won. We won alongside Indigenous allies. We won alongside by working with people who are directly affected. We won by joining forces with our allies. We have won before. My favorite example from my kitchen table was somebody saying, "Yeah, I recently won a fight in my union to continue providing funding to from the union to a Palestine solidarity group." And I asked them, "How did you win?" And they said, one-on-one conversation. They had 200 one-on-one conversation with members of the union, flooded the union meeting, and successfully voted to uphold the funding policy. And that's those moments when people realize, oh my God, we actually have won. I just won yesterday. We won all the time. We won today. Did you know that BC have signed a pharmacare deal, and now we have two provinces that are signed on to the pharmacare program? We won all the time. They just make us forget that we win because it makes us, yeah. Everyone is flooding the chat with win examples. We won all the time. We just need to be reminded that we won before and we can win again. And then asking the questions. How did we win those times, and how do we replicate those examples, learn from those lessons? This is when it gets really exciting. Um, I'm telling you, great time. And then planning for action. Planning for action is essentially the time when you stop and you think about all the things you've learned about one another and all the things that you've won before and all the lessons and all the incredible skills and experience and knowledge that people brought into that table, and that this is something unique about that group of people that can do that things that you can do. And so the question you ask yourself, I mean, you ask the group is, what is this group prepared to do? Next slide, please. Oh my God. Okay. Next, what are you this group prepared to do before, during the election and beyond? Some examples, example that we provided for you is that, first of all, if you don't think there's enough time to unpack something huge, then agree to come back. Set a time, pick a date, find someone else's house to host, choose a different food to serve, and then come back and have that discussion. The other option is to host another kitchen table conversation with new people. Maybe two of you who've been invited as host, as guest, say, I like it. I have a few people I can help and I can host. Then you've already grown the impact in that way. Um, Another option is to attend a solidarity action. The only thing better than going to a rally alone is to go into a rally with a bunch of other people. And I think it's always helpful to understand that, like, if all of us here in the room realize that we are all impacted by the housing crisis and we don't know what to do about it, and then somebody said, but I know Acorn has a rally next week, go to the rally, show up, take action together. And that will be the beginning. And that could doesn't have to be the only action, but it's also always helpful to just continue to gather, to build relationship, to meet with each other. And then the last thing we would like to do is to do a go out a listening canvas. We prepared a toolkit. I don't know where it is. It's not finalized and published, but one day it will be. Um, and the idea is that I think what we want to drive home as part of this campaign is that being curious and compassionate towards people who are considered voting for Poilievre is a strategic decision. They want us to think that there is us versus them. The billionaires benefit from us not listening to one another. To assume that everybody who had one bad opinion is somebody who doesn't deserve all the Canada that we want. And that's not true. Like one of my friend in the kitchen table conversation said that um, I'm gonna teach my male colleague how to unload the dishwasher and then continue to talk to him about Palestine because at the end of the day, it's he and I versus the billionaires, and we can't afford to write him out. And I think that that's the point is that we want to be able to get to a point when we turn around to speaking to the masses, um, we want to be able to do that with a lot of compassion, curiosity, but yeah, and then we understand that like as you have these conversations, there will be feedback that got fed back to us, and then we will create a community together who will develop the next step in action and the strategy together. So this is the very first step. Remember, there's 5 boxes in that arrow. We are on step 1. We're going to keep doing it. Nick is going to keep gathering you in meetings to talk about it. Okay, can we take the slide share down, please? That's a lot of me talking. Apologize. Um, and now it's Nick talking.
All right. Yes, remind me what I'm talking about again.
All right. So what we're doing now is essentially a fishbowl.
Right. Yes.
It's okay. He got roped in the last minute. He's actually technically supposed to be on vacation, you guys. He's here because I made him. But what are we doing? What we're doing right now is we're inviting 2 folks to join Nick in a fishbowl where we will have a conversation to try to model to you this whole complicated flow from personal experience to orienting to solution to planning action. So I think I've reached out to Robin, who have said yes to the fishbowl, right? There's Robin. I'm gonna spotlight you. And then I think I asked another person, but I don't think he's here. Is Charles here? Charles is not here. Well, this is fun. Does anyone want to join the fishbowl with Robin?
Please.
Robin has not been briefed. This is supposed to be unscripted. You are just answering question, come as you are.
I'm game.
Who's that?
Oh,
Sorry.
George is fine too. I'm okay not to go.
Who is it?
This
Sorry.
is Sebastian.
Sebastian. You know what? George has been in a previous fishbowl. Let's get Sebastian's in here. Okay. Sorry,
right.
George. Your insights are always meaningful. All right, I'm gonna get out of this fishbowl. You guys have 15 minutes. Imagine if Nick had just given the script to say corporations are bad,
So
but
it's a little more than that.
Pierre
But yeah.
Poilievre is bad. But yeah, voters are not bad. We got to fight. All right. And then off we go.
Right. So, yes, welcome, Robin and Sebastian. Nice to have you here. I guess we'll start at the beginning, which is how the kind of overlapping crises, be it the cost of living crisis, the healthcare crisis, the housing crisis, the climate crisis, the geopolitical crisis, any of these, which ones are affecting you the most, and like sort of what, yeah, how do they impact you in your daily lives, and which ones do you see affecting your community the most? So I'll let Robin go first, and then Sebastian.
Okay, thank you, Nick. And also thank you, V, for making this your swan song and coming out tonight on your last I guess, day with the Council of Canadians. We're all very lucky. So the question was, how's it impacting me? So I've spent many years as a youth activist. So in Newfoundland, St. John's, Newfoundland, I started something called For the Love of Learning for at-risk or resilient youth um, who were resistant to traditional forms of education. I also started Digitally Lit Atlantic Canadian Youth Read. So it's about teaching young people to be critical about what they're reading and use books as platforms for social justice. And I also created an initiative called Bridge to Publishing, reclaiming the Indigenous narrative of Atlantic Canada. So it was again for youth to have voice. And I think the poly crisis it's been so unabating in the last 5 years that I think while there's a lot of corporate greed, I'm really concerned for youth. And I think people are exhausted and I think I think there's a reason that mostly older people are here. I'm not seeing a lot of 20 somethings here. I think that's because we remember what it is to start things grassroots. We remember what it is to have in-person conversations. We remember before the digital disruption. And so I really feel that these young people need to be able to see a path forward. And I feel that we have to stand up for the next generation. So that's really affecting me. And I also have trans stepchildren, so who are very politically active. And yeah, I worry about how the rise of fascism might impact them as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, that's one of the things that I think maybe got less play in the materials we prepared, but it was something that we were definitely thinking about a lot in the planning of this, and especially thinking about kitchen table conversations with just the crisis of connection, to name yet another crisis, which kind of feeds into why we were like, yeah, this is the right first step, I think, because we need to give people the tools to create these spaces to have these discussions. So yeah, it's a very, very good intervention. Sebastian, how about you?
Yeah, for me, so I'm a newcomer to Canada. I'm originally from Germany, and living here in Halifax, I first only knew Harper. That's the only thing I knew about Canada. And then a Liberal government under Stephen McNeil here in Nova Scotia. And then to see the Conservatives take over as the way they've done in Nova Scotia, and by the fraction of people that were needed in order to win. And then all the disruptions that we had, obviously, and me really wanting a better future for my son. Yeah, that's why I'm here, and that's what I want to talk to people about, because I think we can make a difference, even influencing a few people, and might swing a vote in a district, and that might take them from a super majority to a majority, or from a majority to a minority, or whatever it is, right? So that yeah, it's pretty scary in Nova Scotia right now with a super majority, because these conservatives are just doing things that I wouldn't even have thought would be possible. So yeah, definitely want to fight.
Great. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things we talk a bit about in the primer is just the point that the conservatives are not as strong as they seem. And I mean, recent events with the Trump tariffs and things, I think, have amply shown just how fragile that support actually is. But yeah, I mean, the recent polling, and I think it's something that we included in the primer, showed that the conservatives could have been winning a majority government with barely a quarter of the electoral voting age population voting for them, right? So
Yeah,
I
that's
think
right.
that's something that we've kind of felt is important throughout this campaign, is to highlight the fact that we should be contesting their mandate. They don't have a mandate for a lot of what they're going to do.
Yeah, that's right.
And so we need to be crystal clear about that, because sometimes we can get bowled over by the stats and the numbers that the horse race elections get thrown at us. I guess, I mean, I would very briefly say probably the aspect of all the many crises that are affecting me most directly, although it's not me, would be the healthcare crisis. My wife is a nurse. My sister is a nurse. My aunt is a recently retired nurse. So I've just been seeing and hearing about kind of the healthcare crisis as it's unfolded over the last years and decades, and just how bad things have gotten in the healthcare system, and how at risk it is, really. And so for me, I think that's one of the biggest kind of personal motivators, is just seeing like this whole thing that we have fought so hard to maintain could come crashing down if there was a government in power at the federal level that is intent on wrecking it, you know.
Well, especially
Um,
since they want to privatize everything, right? So,
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. Um, and so I think maybe we could turn just to the question of like the rise of Polyev. And I think one of the things in the primer that we kind of insist on is that you know the social crisis that people are living through, the housing crisis, the cost of living crisis, has obviously been central to Polyev's until recent popularity. I mean, he's still quite popular, he's still leading in many polls. And so, yeah, I just kind of wanted to ask each of you, like, I guess you're both in Halifax, but how you see people in your community. Do you see people responding to that, or what would be, you know, does that resonate with you, the kind of political framing of where Polyev's support is coming from? I don't know Robin, if you want to start.
Yeah, well, um, I think he is a voice maybe for the working class or the oppressed, which is the same thing that seems to be what happened with south of the border. For the person who became president there, I can't even say the name. But yeah, I think that I also think there's been interestingly a real sh because we don't have like social media has replaced journalism. And we don't have, I used to be, well, I am a journalist. I trained as a journalist, and journalists used to be the watchdogs for the people. And that was a really respected profession, and that has been so diluted
Hmm.
by social media. So people are swinging very far to the left and very far to the right because their voices are just not being heard. So if you don't have exposure, for example, to folks who are trans or to information about how the climate's changing, if you're not exposed to that because it's your line of work or because you have family members or friends who are talking about those things, then it's going to freak you out and you're going to shut down if you're somebody who's. I also think we've lost our ability to communicate properly. So I'm really interested in Marshall Rosenberg, has uh, founder of nonviolent communications, and essentially he's worked with warring tribes all over the world. He's been passed away since for about 30 years now, but he founded this, and it's based on empathy and respect and active listening, and really coming from a place that violent communication comes from a place of tragic unmet needs. And that, well, I think I think the thing with him is that there's a lot of people presently with tragic unmet needs, and that's compounded by all the poly crisis that's going on. So we have a perfect storm. We're very economically and politically vulnerable right now um, for these sorts of politics to rise.
Yeah, yeah, and I just like I think we've seen Polyev really kind of lean into that crisis of the media and of democracy. He's pretty much systematically refused interviews with people, with journalists, actual journalists, while doing podcasts and kind of sitting down with Jordan Peterson for a 2 hour interview and things like that. And very much posing himself as an anti-system, anti-establishment kind of candidate. And so I think that's one of the things that is important for us. It seems clear is like we don't yet have something on the left that can stand, or someone or an organization, people who can pose that threat. And then we need that. We need an anti-establishment left. We need movements and leaders and people who can speak out on these things, because in the absence of that, I think, most people won't vote, and some people will vote for the Polyev, kind of imitation of that. So yeah, Sebastian, if you wanted to say something more about what
Yeah,
you've seen.
I'm willing to say the name. In the pre-Trump era, if we shall call it that, um, talking to some coworkers who are conservatives, for them, I think it was really about pocketbook issues. They were just seeing everything get more and more expensive, and they wanted it to be cheaper. And they didn't realize that it's not just a party that's causing this, and they wanted simple answers. And that's what people usually go for when they're afraid or when they feel that their living standard of living is threatened, right? Um, and really, sometimes it's like insane because like you might have I make a point of purchasing from local farmers, and these local farmers are like people are coming to me and saying they don't want to pay more expensive price for my chicken, yet they drive up in a Tesla with their Starbucks. Um, and I think this is so true for many people. They mostly go with what's important to them. We see in the Trump era right now where these same coworkers, conservatives leaning, are kind of turning around because something else is threatened, right? So, um, yeah, so that's why I see Polyev's rise is mostly built on fear, as this one person said very rightly in the chat, and
Hmm.
um, I think this is what the world runs on.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Um, I don't know how much time, V, if I've run the course for our fishbowl, or if
You have 2 minutes.
I have 2 minutes. Okay. So this is where I should be orienting to solutions, root causes. Um, yeah, I guess, for each of you, I mean, like the, the kind of 3 word slogans that Polyev has been throwing out there. Um, I'm going to build the home, stop the crime, axe the tax, etc., fix the budget. They've just become staples. But so, yeah, what would are those actually adequate solutions to the kind of problems and the crises that we're facing, whether it's the democratic or the crisis of the media, or the kind of pocketbook issues that your colleagues have been facing? So what I guess what would you see as the solutions to those issues if it's not what Polyev has on offer?
I would say local belonging communities, small. I think we live in a globalized world, and they're able to divide us and then scare us. And I think we have to go back to more basics and learn to be more basic again. And I think that's how, in like the smaller way, we're going to actually succeed better.
Hmm. Could you say a bit more about that? Like,
Like, for example, like you think about like concrete action kind of thing or solutions. So like, if you look at Cuba, um, they're a very restricted country and they don't have many resources, yet they try to make the best of everything. So they repair their cars rather than buy new cars. They grow food everywhere they can in Havana.
Mm.
have a look at the food systems. So we have lots of opportunities as a society to get away from just the brainless consumption and this consumeristic world that we're trying to live in to a more local economy. And I think that's really what's going to make the difference. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, what you're saying reminds me of a Mike Davis essay. I think it was called "Building the Ark." In the new, but it was about how in not so long ago during the Second World War we did a lot of the same things. We had victory gardens. We had you know restrictions on consumption. People had to carpool. Like not crazy stuff. People were consuming less stuff, but they were living in many cases better than they had been a couple years prior in the Great Depression. So yeah, that definitely resonates with me. So yeah, Robin, last word, and then we'll wrap up because I'm getting a message that we're out of time.
Okay, well, I agree with Sebastian about the local, working from the local level and building community. Um, we've lost our way and we have been deeply manipulated at a psychological level. And so we really need to find that again. Yeah, I think that building relationships, grassroots relationships with people around us and working together, communicating in a way that's healthy, like a nonviolent communications, getting off the screens. I mean, I'm glad we're able to have this meeting, but like getting off the screens and just getting out into nature and getting back to what actually matters. I don't know if anybody's ever watched The Century of Self, about Edward Bernays and sort of how,
Adam Curtis documentary.
yeah, BBC,
Yeah.
I think, and about the sort of how the 20th century became all about consumerism. And we're at the other end of that now. I think we're going to have no choice to do that very soon anyway. Um, but yeah, I guess that's the end of the 2 minutes.
All right, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Robin and Sebastian, for stepping up unprompted. That's great. Really appreciate having you both here.
Um,
Welcome.
All right. Thank you, Robin and Sebastian, for the virtual um, applause. Yeah, so now you see that the flow of conversation is that most people come in with their own um, experience. And I think we just that the key thing is to make the space for folks to share their personal experience, like Nick has done. Um, Obviously, it wouldn't be 15 minutes, it would be 2 hours. So no one will be cutting you off. Although, as a facilitator, I would encourage folks to make sure that everyone has equal opportunity to contribute. Um, and then I think something that we included, I know on Tuesday a lot of people ask about templates. There's a template invitation email that also we would invite people to like attach the election primer so people can read it through, process it, have some questions, and then come in with those questions. But yeah, any other thoughts on how that conversation went? Any questions that folks have? Quickly. Well, Nick nailed
how
it, so.
how do you
Oh,
control Sebastian actually,
yes.
how do you control situations where, and I include myself in this, if you get somebody who's like pulling you in a different direction than what you thought the evening would go to,
Mm-hmm. Like in what way?
like in a different extreme, right? Like they're like you wanted to kind of get them politically active, and they just keep talking about the whatever the new electrical solar thing that's installed on their fields next door that they're opposing.
Absolutely. That's a really good question. I think in the guide we were trying to say that like first of all, as a host, you don't need to have you don't need to have the answer to all the questions. Second of all, whenever people present any simple solution to say all of this will be fixed if we have blah, um, my favorite question is to respond to that question, but then why do you think we don't have it yet? And then I think encourage people to dig to the root cause of the question of the problem. And like I mean, I don't think you should hesitate to say, I think you've taken up a lot of t time with your question, and we would invite so and so to share because we haven't heard from them yet. Um, because a couple things. One is that like there are things you can do to direct the conversation, and my favorite tactic is to ask question about the question. To be like, what do you mean by that? Or why do you think we don't have blah blah blah? Why do you think we don't have proportional representation? It's because we don't have power. How do we get power organized? Or the other thing is that I think my like a typical facilitation guideline is that there's only one type of conversation that the group of that specific group of people in that particular moment can have. So if that's where the conversation needs to be for everyone in the room, then that's where it goes, and that's okay. For example, I had a conversation with a bunch of people who all work for the federal government, and then unfortunately, in order for them to think about taking political action, they need to be able to resolve the fact that they are public servant who are participating in the political process in an advocacy way, and people need to be able to overcome that barrier. And so if that's where the conversation is stuck at, because everyone needs that question answered in order to move on, then that's where it has to stay. But if that's just one person's roadblock, we invite that person to think about it more and come back later or share more resource, but it doesn't have to stay there if that's not what the group wants. That's some of the thoughts that I have. Elizabeth, I'll take Elizabeth's question and then I'm going to move on.
It's really a comment,
Mm-hmm.
if you don't mind. For myself, until my parents passed away and a sister passed away, my life was difficult from all that time, from the time I was a child. I mean, I was a happy person, don't get me wrong, but I always had to be very, very careful, especially financially.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think part of the responsibility where we are is political parties. Part of it, they are more corrupt than they were before, but not that much more because Diefenbaker sold the Avro out right under the Canadians and lied about it. So there's nothing new under the sun. But Canadians themselves have got greedy, and I have so many friends that if it happens to them, then they come and say, Liz, you know what's going on? And I'm like, looking, I just want to say, would you please leave the room? Thousands of people have been dealing with this for decades. And I find that a lot, and we've got ourselves self-privileged. Like, we're not racist, but we're this elite group of people in the population of the world that thinks we're entitled to all these things. We haven't had to fight for it. Like my family, we had to fight for everything. And now I'm old, and I taught my children the kind of food to eat. They never wanted it, but guess what? They're in their 50s now, and they're cooking it now. It is like this whole depth of knowledge that my grandparents had and my mother had. She passed me, and I happened to take the good sense of listening to it. And that means you have to care about everything. We don't, no matter how much we sell this, I don't want to sound negative, we're not going to sell it at all because Canadians have to go through a crisis of identity that we have been incredibly selfish.
Well,
No
thank
one
you,
is talking
Elizabeth.
about that.
Elizabeth, thank you so much. And I think that what you are raising is essentially what we need to make space for people to work through, right? There's a lot of like cognitive dissonance, a lot of crisis of identity, like you said, a lot of personal, intergenerational, and social trauma, essentially, that we need to work through. And there isn't a space for us to work through these. And I'm hoping that these are the conversations that will provide a loving, caring, welcoming community for people to be able to work through this. Like there were so many tears in my kitchen table conversation because people realize that like they're scared, they're angry, they're frustrated, and there isn't a space for emotions in society. And so I hope that you could take what we have started today and carry it forward and build those kind of beautiful community and I think these are radical community spaces that will be a seat for collective action. And I know that many Council Canadian chapter, for example, started in living rooms when people just need to be able to find a community, a political home. And what better way to start political home than in somebody's home? Uh, okay,
Absolutely.
I'm going to use the last 3 minutes to run through the last bit of the slide to just share with you what what that looks like, what the follow through looks like. So after the conversation, we have a little bit we have like a follow-up template. Essentially, we invite you to fill out the, well, what is it called? The feedback form. And then we send that feedback form out to people and then let us know, like tell Nick that those questions don't work. These are the ones that work. And then workshop them. Let us know what issues are coming up. And then this is not the obviously this is the beginning. This is the beginning of the beginning of the beginning of building a political home. So please keep that in mind. Once again, if you go to canadians.org/unite for the Canada we want, that's where we will constantly update the landing page with new resources. Um, I said we. It's not going to be me. Ha ha.
It'll be Eagle. The comms guy.
It'll be me.
It will be Eagle. Yeah, so we will, if, for example, you provide input, we will update the content. He will update the content, and then we'll put it on the website, and then we'll let you know. I'm gonna say we for another 3 minutes. And then if you need to reach out to Nick for any support to be connected to people in your community, the email is many versus money at canadians.org. VS for versus, many versus money. We are the many, they are the money, and we can win, and we can beat them. And then join the Slack. So what the Slack does is it's essentially creating a space with a channel for everyone who is doing the same thing to get together. So you can just put in the Slack and say, I host mine today, and this is how it went. And then we can learn with one another. The link to join the Slack is in the thingy-mabob that is in the chat. Next email is many versus money at canadians.org. After this training, we'll send a follow-up. And yeah, it might be a bit late because Nick is on vacation.
Yeah, I think yeah, joining the Slack is important. It can be a place where we can interact, in between bigger meetings like this, trainings, and so on. And I've already been fairly active in it. If you've never used Slack before, you can download it and put it on your phone, and the interface is very similar to Facebook. You can send direct messages, there are channels, and you can post things in the channel about different topics. And so we have an elections channel there, and I'll be posting things about Polyev and the upcoming elections. So, and there'll be a channel where, yeah, there's a way we can keep in touch, and if you have questions, we can try to respond to you as best we can. And I would say the planning should start sooner rather than later. We have no idea when the election is going to start. It could be very soon, it could be in a couple of months, but the sooner we get on this, the better. And the better position we'll be in going into an election and afterwards.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right, and we're at 7:30, which is the intended time for the end of this meeting. I just want to go to the very last slide, which is always the last slide of every Council of Canadians gathering, to say that the thing that makes this training possible for Nick and I and Eagle to be here, to all the resource that we provided, all the support that we hope to continue to provide you, comes from individual support. It is people like you giving whatever you can every month or once a year. And it is like tens of thousands of you that keep this organization running and keep the infrastructure in this critical moment where we need an organized left to push back against the corporate agenda, to resist Polyev. We are 100%, we are member funded, no corporation, no government. We're gonna keep up the fight. They're gonna keep up the fight. I mean, I'm also going to keep up the fight. So please become a member. monthly or one time, please support this movement because we need it now more than ever. And I appreciate you all for joining the meeting. Can you take the screen share down so I can see everyone's faces? And yeah, I think that's the end of the training. It's recorded, so you can grab it if you missed bits and pieces. I don't want to see my face. Please take my
There you go.
spotlight down. And for those who have seen me in these spaces before, I just want to say that this is one of the most special experience of my life, my career, to be able to support and work with the Council of Canadians and work alongside many of you. It's my last day at the council, and this is how I would like to go out. So,
Who works this hard on their last day on a job? I mean, I'm
Well,
flabbergasted.
thank you very
Can't believe it.
much for all your effort. Oh my gosh, we can't. She kept it a secret and she's gone already, right? No, she's still there.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Thank you, V.
Thank you very much. You're very wise.
I am not going to go far. I will be part of the Council of Canadians family until one of you kick me out.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Nick and V.
All right. Good luck with
We'll
your kitchen
miss
table
you.
conversation.
Yeah.
I hope it went great. I can't wait to hear about them.
Yes.
Through Nick.
Thank you, V, for all your work. You're
Thank you.
amazing.
Thank you
All right.
to my colleagues, Eagle and Nick, for putting this training on. Thank you all for
Thank
helping us
you.
workshop these materials.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
much.
Bye.
Bye bye.